Welcome to the Business of Esports podcast, where we explore the intersection of business and esports, the fastest growing entertainment phenomenon of this generation. Please welcome your hosts, Arda Okal, William Collis, and Paul Dawalibi. The Business of Esports podcast begins now.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Business of Esports podcast. This is where we unpack all the big news stories of the week pertaining to the business of esports. My name is Arda Okal, and I am so glad that we have the entire band back together. Yes, you heard that correctly. All three of us are here. Paul Dawalibi is here. William Collis is here. We are all here, and guess what? We will be here weekly. Every single week, Paul, we will be bringing you the business of esports. How excited are you about that?
Can't stand myself. I'm so excited. It's just ridiculous.
Guys,
the craziness.
William, how are you, bud?
I'm so excited. It's been a while since I've recorded. You know, this is one of my favorite things that I do, and I'm particularly excited because while you were giving that intro, Arda, I was on your Twitter seeing your recommendations for original NES ice hockey lineups and cracking up.
That's correct.
So,
as you know, I'm a big retro gaming fan, and this week in 1988, the original Nintendo ice hockey came out, which has nothing to do with the business of esports, except for the fact that it's on the NES Online, which I guess is doing good numbers because they keep releasing titles every month.
I think it does. I mean, it's the genesis of games today. I mean, esports had to start somewhere, just like sports. I mean, it wasn't like sports were born with football. You know, at some point, people were just throwing rocks and sticks. You know, I mean, I think ice hockey on the NES is a little bit better than rocks and sticks.
That'll be a good side podcast for another day. We got a lot to talk about, though. Gentlemen, very happy that you are here. Before we get started, though, please rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get whatever podcatcher you use. If you leave a 5-star rating and a favorable review, it helps other fans of business and or esports find this podcast. We really appreciate that. And also follow us on social media on Twitter at BizEsports. And the website is thebusinessofesports.com. Every single day, you will get links right there daily from Paul, all the big news items of the day so that you can read up and get prepared for this podcast full of opinion, full of analysis from two titans in the esports industry and me. All right, let's get to it right now. We got a lot to talk about. Number one, Dr. Disrespect in the news. He has signed with Creative Artists Agency, CAA. Many people would qualify CAA as the biggest talent agency out there. They have been around for a very long time, at the top of the mountain. They've even had oral histories written about them. Powerhouse by James Andrew Miller, a very good book if you don't know too much about the agency world. That's a great book to pick up. But this really signals to me, as somebody who deals with agents as a broadcaster, CAA is often the gold standard. And for Dr. Disrespect to align himself with CAA, this really signals a possible mainstream penetration for his career in 2019. We could see some big moves, Paul, from Dr. Disrespect, and not just esports tournaments, increased streaming and gaming and revenue, whatnot. You're going to see him on NBC and CBS and ABC, projects attached with him. This is what this signals to me.
Yeah, I think this is actually a good news, bad news story, and I'll explain what I mean here. The great news, I think the incredible thing here is good for Dr. Disrespect, first of all. This is massive for him personally. And the fact that CAA is looking at this in the way, obviously, that they are to sign someone like the doc means that the mainstream is starting to take notice in a really big way. Now, what this really means for Dr. Disrespect, I think, is he is going to cross over into the mainstream entertainment, NBC's, Netflix's, shows, God knows what else he might be doing with CAA or planning with CAA. And I think there's good and bad there. The good is that it will bring more attention to streaming and gaming. The bad is, deep down, I hate feeling like we need mainstream entertainment's approval for us as an industry, the esports gaming industry, to be legitimate. I hate the fact that we have to go and appear on NBC for people to care, if that makes sense.
For who to care? Just the mainstream conscience?
Yeah. Like, well, why can the industry not grow on its own, learn to walk on its own, learn to run on its own? Why do we need the crossover? And you see it also with sports, right? Traditional sports, where esports is trying to attach themselves to big sporting events like the Australian Open is doing some tennis thing with Fortnite. Why do we need traditional media and traditional sports to have legitimacy as an industry? I think I'm not poo-pooing it, because I actually think we need to go there. But I wonder if the industry can be successful without it, because my core belief, and I've said this publicly, is that gaming, esports as an industry, at some point in the future will be bigger than all of entertainment is today, bigger than TV, movies, music, sports, you name it. The industry we live and breathe today is going to be bigger than all of those put together. So why do we need to attach ourselves to it to get there?
I feel like it's a paradigm shift, William. Don't you? Don't you feel like it's more so Dr. Disrespect is so undeniable that he will penetrate the mainstream, as opposed to he needs the mainstream to get over, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things. I have a whole bunch of thoughts on this. Let's start with, I think it's more what you're saying, Arda, which is it's not Dr. Disrespect needs CAA. I mean, look, he got to be one of the top streamers on Twitch with a massive following, before CAA was ever involved. It's more CAA is recognizing that they need talent like Dr. Disrespect. This is a new type of talent that is just as deserving of representation as Will Ferrell or, Tommy Lee Jones, right? Let's also not forget, though, that CAA is not exactly early to the party here. I mean, as early as 2017, you had IMG not just representing esports talent, but actually launching esports talent platforms like Boomio. Ultimately that particular venture did go under, but I mean, this is not the first time what I would call a major professional talent organization has come into the space. I mean, already most top streamers are represented by at least some sort of agency, if not one of the big three, at least a specialty or a boutique. But I do think the CAA picking up Dr. Disrespect is particularly interesting, because Dr. Disrespect to me is an interesting streamer. He blurs the line between actor and, life broadcaster. Most streamers, like let's take a Brian Kibler, for example, who I love, I'm sure he has somewhat of a personality that he puts on for his fans or his podcast. But the reality is you're sort of still getting Brian Kibler, right?
He uses his dog for views. Come on, let's be honest. Shiro's like the most adorable dog in life.
Adorable. We should do a whole podcast about that too. But Dr. Disrespect is different because he plays a character. I mean, he plays this ridiculous sort of, for people who don't know, he wears these dark glasses. He has a thick mustache. He looks sort of commando military, and he plays this ridiculous, tough guy sort of, but yet somewhat clearly self-aware parody of like a hardcore military gamer. That's a little bit of acting, right? Like this is almost like a Borat character or an Ali G character. And I think because of that, the CA representation is interesting, because Dr. Disrespect is a sort of a unique brand that can move into other places.
So that's what better. I'm wondering. I'm wondering more if we will see the Dr. Disrespect character on television, on network television, in some sort of involvement, or will it be the man behind the Dr. Disrespect character, which I see is less likely. I think CAA is looking at this and saying, we can brand Dr. Disrespect in so many different ways. Put him in commercials, put him as and I can see him being like how Ninja has the Amazon Prime NFL thing going on. Yeah. I think that Dr. Disrespect can do some very similar things in character to other brands and other franchises as well.
You want me to make a bold prediction here? Yes. And this is very bold, but I would stand behind this. And I'm quite serious. This is going to sound absurd when I say it, but bear with me. Dr. Disrespect movie.
I was going to say, I think we're going to see him in a Marvel movie. I think we're going to see him in an MCU movie.
Wow. Who, as a villain, he's going to be the main villain to the next Spider-Man or something? Is that what you think? Wow. Maybe he's going to be part of the evil Avengers. Like there's another one. Maybe Thanos recruits him or something.
Here's the question for you guys. And I love the doc, so I'm going to preface it by saying that. And we absolutely would love to have him on the show.
Yeah, can we all just agree that Dr. Disrespect is absolutely incredible? I mean, honestly, there are a lot of big streamers who I'm not such a fan of, but Dr. Disrespect, he captured my heart.
I watch him just about every single day. And so here's the question. Is he a gamer or is he an actor?
I think he's the perfect combination of both. I think I think he's going to inspire so many people to create characters like his. I think that he is, coming from the world of professional wrestling, he is a perfect character.
I ask that question because really what I'm trying to get at is he going to be additive to the esports and gaming industries? Or is he really just going to push the entertainment industry forward one step?
What do you think, William?
Or do we
I don't
care?
see it as sort of mutually exclusive. Like, just like, in the beginning, and this is, maybe I'm wrong about this because I'm reaching way back in time, but I imagine in the beginning of radio, you had casters, news presenters, right? And then you started to have radio dramas and you had characters being born out of the medium of radio, but it started as more of a personal, direct broadcasting medium. I think just the same thing is happening here, is we're realizing that platforms like Twitch can be a method for improv comedy, for character acting, for stylistic interpretation, and I think that's only a good thing. For me, I want to stress this. I really, really think that this Dr. Disrespect movie, I'm not saying that facetiously, because he's about the only mainstream streamer today who I could conceive of constructing an hour and 30-minute plotline around, because he has a character and a viewpoint. As popular as Ninja is, what would the Ninja movie be like other than a documentary? There's not much there. It's a guy who's a great personality, who's really good at Fortnite. Dr. Disrespect is a brand that can go places. So CAA, if you're listening, like, the obvious thing here is Netflix, get it up there. If they greenlighted IO, they'll greenlight this.
The interesting thing, and William, you brought it up, radio, right? When TV started appearing, did TV stars go on the radio to get legitimacy as TV stars? I don't know. I don't think so.
I think
maybe it happened.
I
but
think he sees it as another revenue stream. Honestly,
yeah,
like, he's doing fine. I think that this might even be more of a passion play, or just leveling up in terms of income. But because what else would it be? He's already a successful streamer. If he did that for the rest of his life, he'd be set. So I think this is just more an increase in branding, an increase in opportunities that he may not be able to receive without an agency like CAA behind him.
My concern is, by growing in a different industry as opposed to the industry he's in, does he risk his credibility and what got him there? And I worry a little bit about the Ninja effect, right? Ninja doing football and TV and appearances and God knows what. And now people look at him and go, this guy's kind of a sellout. I don't really know if I care to watch him play Fortnite anymore.
That happens in every industry.
But maybe would Doc...
Put it this way. The Rock is a great example. The Rock became a huge professional wrestler in WWE. Then he left, and the fans were upset with him because he left. And he left them for several years. But then when he returned, he got a hero's welcome because he became successful in another genre, while the fan base that he became popular in the first place felt like he was representing them in that world. So if Dr. Disrespect becomes very famous and popular, an A-list celebrity, then the gaming community might very well say, we rally behind Doc because he represents us.
Maybe, but I think The Rock might be a little bit of the exception here, right? Like, the argument is, should the Doc have stayed more in his lane? In other words, start a game studio or do broadcasts of esports events, or things that are more in his lane, start an apparel and accessories company for esports or gaming, right? Like, is there ways to grow your brand that don't involve another medium or another industry that keep you truer to what got you there? That's really the question.
William, any final thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I just want to put it in context, which is, so, this is, again, CAA is doing other things in esports outside of Dr. Disrespect. Probably the biggest thing they have is, as I understand it, CAA is invested in Vision Esports, which is a holding and investment company that has backed things like Echo Fox and Twin Galaxies, right? So, just to be clear here, while this is a very significant signing in and of itself, this is clearly part of a larger strategy employed by CAA to access this space and broaden its reach in this space. And I think that is really the message to take away from this. Is it's significant that one of the most prominent streamers has joined this platform, but it's more significant that he's joined in the context of a concerted strategy by CAA to own and understand esports. Because again, it points to whether Paul likes it or not, these guys are going to be representing talent and doing things in the space. Now, maybe they will ultimately lose out because they're quote unquote old school. I don't know, or they don't have the flexible business model for this new generation of, media driven celebrity. I don't know, but it is really significant to say, look, I mean, again, just underscore esports has arrived. You have this much force and this much executive and industry power from a major agency invested in understanding and mastering this space. And Dr. Disrespect is just the masthead, the figurehead, the most visible viewpoint of a broader trend that's been brewing since really 2017.
I totally agree with the conclusion, William, that esports has arrived is really the message here. What I think is going to happen, though, and I'm not saying it will happen with CAA because I actually think they've got some smart people there that know what they're doing here, but I think what's going to happen is the other traditional talent agencies will pile in, will say, hey, there's an audience here. We've got to start signing clients here because there's an audience here. And they will really, a lot of those clients' careers, I think, will get messed up because the agencies just don't understand the space they came from, right? If you're an agent and you know how to book TV and movies and things like that, it's very different, I think, from taking a star who comes from a very different industry with an audience who I would argue is quite loyal and hardcore in their views. Mm-hmm. And so I think some of these agencies will mess up. There will be missteps and some stars will get burned as a consequence.
You talked about it earlier there, just esports has arrived. That leads us into topic number 2. And by the way, if you want to add some, whether you agree or disagree with what William and Paul are saying, you can always tweet us at Biz Esports. This leads us greatly into our second topic. CNBC recently published an article saying that esports could become a $1 billion, that's with a B, industry in 2019. Some of the points that they hit on was more investors, growth and emulation of the Overwatch League, being a good model to emulate moving forward, increased audiences in prominent leagues like CSGO, Dota 2, viewership, pointing to the fact that the League of Legends final saw 200 million viewers worldwide, whereas they compared it to the Super Bowl seeing 103 million, and the rise of smaller titles as well. That's a very alluring figure, right? $1 billion. Sounds like a lot of money, of course. The industry growing to that amount. Paul, let's start with you on this one. When you read this article and when you see their rationale, what are you thinking?
To be honest, when I saw the article, I laughed.
Okay, good.
I laughed.
Great first impression.
I laughed not because I think there's anything wrong in that article. I actually think, it was Annie Pei who wrote the article, and I think at CNBC, and I think she was spot on with her analysis, right? I think Overwatch League did a lot of good things. I think everything she talked about was correct. I laughed because I feel like the mainstream media, the CNBCs of the world, are really playing catch up here. It's like they just woke up and the party's been going on for 2 hours. And now they're 2 hours late to this party. And for me, who's been at the party for 2 hours, I sort of chuckled because I'm going like, okay, like, thank you, CNBC, for saying we're a legitimate industry. But everyone here knew this. There was no sort of incredible insight in there that made me go, wow, I'm now really much more excited. Now, I think, again, it's CNBC talking about esports as a $1 billion industry is really underscoring the esports has arrived. My view is they just didn't take their conclusions far enough. I think $1 billion industry is just the tip of the iceberg, as I've said.
For 2019.
Even for 2019.
Okay.
I think we're going to see really massive growth over the next 3 years, probably the biggest growth in all of the industry's history. And so I just don't think anyone is being ambitious enough or optimistic enough regarding their own projections for where the industry is going to go.
William?
Yeah, I was actually trying to see if I could find the exact figure while Paul was talking, but my understanding is you had about $500 million in venture capital enter esports in 2018. Mm-hmm. In venture capital. So, I mean, guys, VCs aren't investing for a 2x return. I mean, just on like sort of the most obvious top line metric imaginable, this $1 billion claim, I think, even given it's 2019, is weak. We will wake up. I mean, it is true that revenue in the esports industry is really chasing the viewership numbers and the audience numbers. It is true that as a space, the monetization tactics haven't really been solved as they need to. So it is, the claim of $1 billion in that sense is impressive. But the other thing I would say, put it in the context of publisher revenues. I mean, Riot Games, I think, cleared $2 billion last year. Is that not esports? We're not counting it that because they're counted as a game developer, right, or a game publisher. But I mean, the only thing they make is an esport. So again, I also think this claim is a little bit myopic. It's really just talking about the sponsorship and advertising revenue in the space. When really, if you zoom out on what is an esport, like it would be like forgetting to count the football part of football, just counting the jersey sales and things. We've already surpassed that number. So if anything, I'm fully aligned with Paul here. And I think it just underscores the fact that, look, the people who are coming to the space for the first time aren't ambitious enough in predicting it.
Well, that is a $1 billion figure that we're talking about there. But how about a $100 million figure? That is the figure that was attached to Fortnite Esports for 2019 alone. So that's important to note. $100 million, 2019 Fortnite Esports. Paul, you have a lot of opinions on Fortnite Esports, so I'll let you lead this one. $500,000. It will be the first event for the Secret Skirmish at an undisclosed location. It will kick off 2019 with a huge event next month in February. You can expect same high-powered matches as TwitchCon and PAX, but also expect to explore additional operations during the 2 days of competition. That is from Epic. It's also an opportunity for the casting talent to get acclimated for the big World Cup and other major events coming up. So $500,000, $100 million, second month of the year. A little bit of catching up to do, but to me, Paul, it just lends itself to having giant events. They could still divvy up the rest of it between 4 or 5 giant events if that's the game plan. They
could. I don't know why they're doing really small events like this, right? They come out, they make a very big claim. We're going to give away $100 million of prize pools for Fortnite Esports, and then they're doing 500,000 events. Like, they're going to have to hold a lot of $500,000 prize money events to give away the $100 million. And the bigger picture, I think, and there was a blog post that I put up maybe about a week and a half ago now, talking about how everyone was wrong about esports predictions in 2019. One of them is everyone thinks Fortnite esports is going to be a big thing, when reality, I think it's going to be the Titanic moment of 2019. It's going to be everyone thinks this is an unsinkable ship, and the reality is Fortnite esports will sink. One of the big problems that no one addresses is just how often they change the game, for example. So introducing new things before big tournaments, before big events.
Biggest example being the boombox being introduced right before the last event of the year, which was in late December.
And the Infinity Blade, right? Ninja complained about that to no end because, he thinks he got knocked out of the last tournament because of it, and no one could prepare for it or train for it, basically. And so I think they're just not set up as a game to be a great esport. It's a fun game with a great audience and a huge player base, but I think so much of the game is just not set up for it. And I worry that they will never hit that $100 million number. I believe they will not get there.
William, how much do you think Epic Games should care about Fortnite esports?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think they clearly care a lot. I mean, you don't announce $100 million into something you feel lukewarm about, even if you have just raised a massive venture capital round. So that's A. But B, I'm so interested that Paul is so down on Fortnite, because I could not be higher on Fortnite. Yes, I think this was a game that grew up as a let's be honest, as a more casual battle royale. It was the more casual PUBG. And as a result, it's made a number of decisions around monetization and fan engagement that are a little bit antithetical to how esports are done today. Definitely true. Were they going to have to ship up shape here? Is that right? Shape up ship? Are they going to have to shape up? Well, say that 10 times fast.
How about just shape up?
Yeah, are they going to have to shape up here, right? And get some processes in order in the house? Yes. But by the way, plenty of big companies do this Infinity Blade, patch issue. I mean, Hearthstone by Blizzard, who I think Blizzard is, the godfather of esports. I mean, they had a patch hit right before a Hearthstone tournament that invalidated half the decks. I mean, even big companies, make these mistakes and do these things. I think Epic can figure out how to coordinate patches and story updates for esports. I think they have enough money and a popular enough title to clear those, what I would characterize as low-hanging hurdles. And I think more broadly, very bluntly, I'm not even sure if we need to be upset about something like the Infinity Blade dropping. I get that professional athletes want to have time to train and to master the meta because it lets them shine more. But I could see a world where the very first thing that happened, when a new Fortnite content update hit, was a massive tournament with the pros struggling to figure out and decipher the new weapons and story content. And by the way, there's models for that. Magic the Gathering, that's how they launch their new sets, with pros doing, essentially a surprise draft. They have, it's not quite the same as with the launch of the set, but it's very closely timed because they want the pros to engage right away to inspire people with the new card pool. I mean, why couldn't it work that way for Fortnite? They want Ninja to struggle with the Infinity Blade so you can get psyched about it. So I don't think there's necessarily even a problem with that cadence. I think this was just an issue of expectations. More broadly here, Fortnite is the most successful esport on pretty much any metric you would select, whether it's viewership on Twitch, monthly active users, whatever you want to pick. It's one of the best financed esports, thanks to its most recent venture round. And candidly, the biggest celebrities in esports, I mean, the celebrity we just talked about, Dr. Disrespect and Ninja, the two main guys, they're Fortnite streamers, right? Yeah. They do Fortnite content.
At the end of the day, I'm with you, William. At the end of the day, I believe that there's so much interest, so many eyeballs, and so much money on Fortnite that esports, whether you believe you love the path that it's taking, or whether you believe that it is succeeding in spite of itself, it will succeed because it'll simply power through like a fast moving locomotive because the infrastructure, the two biggest things are there. The money is there and the eyeballs are there. Exactly. So whether or not you like a meta changing item being released the day of a tournament, or whether you like the idea of players being able to practice for several months to get to a tournament to compete at the highest levels, either way, people are going to watch, whether they complain or not.
Yeah,
right.
I'll use a television example, CSI, right? I don't love CSI. I doubt you love CSI, Arda, or you love CSI, Paul, but it is by many measures the most successful television series to hit, right?
Yes.
When things are popular and hit scale, they do lose some of their uniqueness. They do lose some of their innate appeal, and they do hit this problem of sort of a little bit of a bland obviousness to them. But it doesn't change the fact that they're incredibly successful and continue to be so. And that is going to be Fortnite. And by the way, I don't even think it's a fair parallel to be comparing Fortnite to CS, because I think Fortnite is a great game. I really do. I really like Fortnite. It's not my favorite game, but I truly, truly think Fortnite is incredibly well executed, and it can be fun to play.
I also, William, think Fortnite is a great game. I don't play it, but I do think it's a great game. I'm one of the few people who actually paid $100 for it, right? Not many people can say that.
Save the world, man.
But I think both of you are wrong. I think just because you have a great game with a big audience, a big player base, and a well-funded company behind it, doesn't mean it will be successful as an esport. I think those things are correlated, but I don't think there's direct causation there.
But successful according to
Successful according to, will it endure like a CSGO has or a Dota has? Will it generate tons of money for the publisher, or is it more of just a publicity stunt? I think Fortnite esports is more marketing spend for Epic than it is a legitimate player in the esports world.
Today, I agree. On that point, I agree today. I still think it's important to them, not as important as the revenue that's coming from the game. for sure. That's clear. But what about so long as the Fortnite remains the most popular game out there and the viewer base is there and the money is there, how can you bet against it?
You can just look. I watch a lot of esports for games I don't play.
Mm-hmm.
I don't play Dota. I've dabbled in the same way I've dabbled with Fortnite, but I don't play Dota. But I never miss the international. Never. I watch every single one every year. That's a perfect example of a game I'm not that interested in, that I don't play, right? Where I'm still engaged in the esport because the game succeeds as an esport, even if it doesn't succeed as a game for me. Fortnite doesn't succeed as a game for me, but I don't think it's going to succeed as an esport either.
So you're going to skip the Fortnite World Cup once a year because of this?
I'm not going to watch any Fortnite esports.
You're not?
Because to me, it's just not exciting as an esport. It's a great game. It's a fun game. I think Epic has done some amazing things, but I think you can have a great game and a huge player base, but still fail as an esport.
Okay, so I understand your point a little more here. Your point is, which I think is very true, is just because you have a popular video game does not mean you have a popular esport. Fortnite is designed to be a great playable experience, but it's not to be designed to be a great viewer experience, or it's not designed to sustain high-level competitive play, and therefore it will struggle to translate to capture a viewership audience, even though it comes with a pre-built base of players. That's the point in a nutshell, right?
Yeah, and there are things intrinsic in the game that make it a fun and accessible game, but I think kill it as an esport. Like third person. To have third person in a shooter makes it fun, makes it accessible, makes it easy to play, but it adds a level of randomness that A, will turn off pros, and B, for a viewer, you're not getting the most competitive experience. You're not watching the best compete against the best with no luck or randomness involved.
Yeah, I see the point. I think about this. This is one maybe we revisit in 2 or 3 months, because I hear what you're saying. I'm a believer that the issues inherent in Fortnite as an esport are fixable, that Fortnite already has a content cadence that allows it to get fixed in a relatively timely fashion. And that there's enough money and resources and intelligence at Epic Games that the issues will be bridged, and the advantages of such an existing player base that can convert to viewers and such existing streaming personalities that will obviously be promoting the esports activities. I see that as getting over the hump. But I guess it comes back to something I feel about traditional sports that maybe is sacrilege to say. I don't know, but I'll say it anyway. I just think, like, is football the greatest sport ever made? I don't think so.
Which football, William?
Let's say American football, but this is the same for any sport. Let's even use soccer, which is the sport I like the most. I love soccer. Is soccer the greatest sport ever made? I don't know. I mean, there are probably lots of different variations on sports with slightly different rules or slightly different ways of interacting that might even be better or more entertaining as a competitive playing field as soccer or football or baseball or what have you. But we care about soccer and football and baseball because of all the ecosystem elements that grow up around them, because you can talk about the FIFA score or the NFL score over a water cooler, because you can read a blog about the latest baseball match. Fortnite has so many of those ancillary things. Even if the game as a whole is not the best game, for esports, those will be it will be overcome by the cultural saturation the game delivers. Like if there was justice in the world, Rainbow Six Siege would be the best first-person sport. I mean, let's be honest, but it's not. And I think if you ask anybody who's really, really, really serious, they would say Rainbow Six Siege is the best competitive first-person shooter right now. It is the least performing of all the shooters for esports. Is it having a resurgence? Somewhat. But is it anywhere near the level of Overwatch or even PUBG? No. So these sports are more than gameplay, is what I'm saying. Right. And in fact, gameplay becomes increasingly less important over time. I would argue baseball is not a good game. It's boring. It's really boring. But it saturated the American pastime because it was a way of connecting. It brings people together, and Fortnite has the cultural penetration to do that.
Well, I can say that we will all agree that this is not the last time we're going to talk about Fortnite esports on this podcast. We will continue to monitor that scene as it goes along, and I'm sure that we will be debating that topic very, very soon. Topic number 4 of our 5 topics on this podcast still has to do with Fortnite, but in relation to other companies. EA and Activision stock prices are down, and Netflix says it competes with and loses to Fortnite, even more so than other subscription-based platforms like Hulu and HBO. The stocks for EA and Activision are both down nearly 40% from last year's highs. While a sell-off might make them attractive in the long run, the 2 largest independent U.S. game publishers are likely to be dead money in the year ahead. But definitely, Fortnite is to blame, at least if you ask people within those walls, for the current state of those 3 companies anyway, but definitely the gaming industry as a whole. But regarding EA and Activision as companies, William, let's start with you here. Do you feel like there is a sense of panic in those walls, and will there be any sort of, correction or any sort of stock market fluctuation as a result?
Well, I want to I'll answer that direct question, and then I want to go back to the Netflix point, because I think that's that's the part that really excites me. I think that's really interesting. But just staying with the EA Activision point. So clearly, if you look at, for example, Activision Blizzard stock, has taken a beating recently. I think it's down close to 50%. Clearly, that in the market, there's a question about a value correction for these companies. I personally think that Activision Blizzard is an amazing buy right now. Not that I hope I'm not, this is not stock advice, guys. I'm not licensed to give it, but
William, you have to disclose if you have EA Activision
I have
shares.
to disclose all my life savings was moved to Activision Blizzard shares right before this call. Full disclosure, this is now a pump and dump podcast. But no, I mean, I really think, the fundamentals of these companies. I mean, these companies are some of the largest, not just esports production companies, but video game production companies. The fundamentals of these companies have not changed drastically over the last year. You can argue, yes, there are important senior leadership departures. Yes, in the case of Activision Blizzard, you had a studio leave. Those are all significant headwinds. Do they destroy, in the case of Activision Blizzard, do they destroy half the value of the company? No way. I think it's a bit of an overreaction on the part of the market, because the reality is gaming and esports are hit-driven businesses. Sometimes you have a year with a bunch of hits, sometimes you don't. We don't see movie studio values fluctuating up or down 50% based on if The Hangover 2 wasn't quite as big of a hit as The Hangover 1. There's an understanding in those mediums that there will be hit-driven performance from year to year, and it doesn't change the underlying fundamentals of the studio business. I just think investors haven't quite figured out that esports and video game productions, at least in these new revenue models, aren't steady, or don't need to be steady fixed revenue streams, that there will be some fluctuation there. But going back to the Netflix point, because this is this is my favorite point on the whole podcast. I think that is so smart of Netflix to view Fortnite as a competitor. So smart. And it goes back to Business School 101, because in Business School 101, the first thing you learn is what are the substitutes for your service, right? And the classic example we had at Harvard Business School was gyms. What are the competitors for gyms? And one of the biggest competitors for gyms is actually not going to the gym, right? You learn that what gyms are really trying to get you to do is use your free time in some way. And, the biggest barrier to getting people into the gym is, in fact, not another gym, but just people being lazy. I think it's the same thing here. Netflix is what you do with your downtime when you don't need to work. Fortnite is another major use of people's downtime. And so even though on the surface, the two things would look very different, they're really competing for the same mind share, which is what you do after you finish work and open a beer, or what you do after school and finish your homework. And in that sense, given the size and scale of Fortnite, I think Netflix is very smart to view them as a competitor. It's also, this is a little outside the business of esports, but it's also a very subtle move on their part to snub the other streaming services. I think Netflix has a little bit of a concern right now with sort of some subscriber growth hurdles and some heavy competition coming from Disney. I think there is an underlying stress on their business about, will they continue to be the dominant streaming model going forward? And I think it's very subtle for Netflix to try to reposition their business in the context of other competitors that aren't streaming services to kind of avoid that question, because implicit in it is, we've crushed the other streaming services. We're so big. This is the thing we're watching out for. And I think that's a smart move for them to try to shift the conversation away from the fact that I'm not going to be able to watch Lilo and Stitch on Netflix anymore because Disney's coming and they have arguably the best content pipeline of all time. So
Right.
I think it's nice for them to kind of it's nice investor management on their part.
Paul, let's talk about the EA and Activision in particular. Is this are the sirens sounding right now? Is there cause for alarm here based on this?
There is. I wouldn't touch those companies with a 10-foot pole today. The interesting part of it is it's really two different conversations. EA, Activision, and Netflix, both of them looking at Fortnite as competitors, I think are two separate conversations. So let's start with EA and Activision. I completely agree with William on his assessment that EA and Activision are not lost here, right? So alarms should be sounding. I think their heads should be rolling. I don't think the management of either of those companies really understands what it takes to build a successful studio in 2019. So there's that. But I think the silver lining for both of those companies is they can beat Fortnite if they want to. If they want to. In the sense that they have all the capabilities to go toe-to-toe with a Fortnite. What I think they're missing, and in fact, I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here. I actually think it's mobile and console that are sinking those companies, ironically enough. Even though I'm sure a large percentage of their revenue today comes from those two, I think the biggest complaint with the EAs and the Activisions of the world is how stagnant game development has been in the last 5 to 10 years, really. We haven't seen a ton of innovation, and I blame watered down platforms like mobile and console and having to develop for those platforms for the stagnation of the industry as a whole, right? We could be playing incredible experiences beyond Fortnite with the resources that an EA or an Activision has. They could be building incredible worlds and massive, games. But the reality is they have to build for $300 consoles and cheap cell phones. And so they can't build those games. They can't build the games that push the industry forward. And so they corner themselves into this, we have to have hits and we have to be a hit-driven industry, which is the plague of the movie business, because you have to hope that you create IP that's valuable, that people latch onto it, and you can do 12 sequels. When in reality, I think the resources should be focused on beating Fortnite by going bigger than Fortnite, by thinking bigger, by building bigger experiences. So the silver line for EA and Activision is they can beat Fortnite, and so they're a good long-term bet. I don't think the management that's there understands this, and so I wouldn't bet on it today, but I think in the long term, they're a good bet.
I got to push back on both those points. So first of all, I would say that I think, particularly let's talk about Activision Blizzard. I think they absolutely are thinking big. I think they're maybe even thinking bigger than Fortnite. And I think they are pushing to beat Fortnite with Overwatch. Now, we can argue about the success of the Overwatch League and if it's done everything it needs to have done to date. But I think that Activision Blizzard is absolutely 100% has Fortnite in their sights, views them as the biggest competitor that they have, and is excited to invest resources and develop, not just development, but huge financial resources and corporate resources to take a humongous bet to counter the Fortnite success story. So that's one. But two, I also push back at this. I do to some extent agree with you that mobile and console are drags on the performance of these, larger games development studios, but not for the reason you identify, Paul. I don't think that the hardware power of consoles or mobile, for that matter, is holding back games. I mean, to be very clear, one of my favorite games the last 5 years was Hollow Knight. I mean, that was made by basically, my understanding is about 2 people in Australia, and that game could have come out on the Sega Saturn. That the games, part of the beauty of games is they don't have to be the most super powered visual experiences or even world building experiences to be entertaining. I think there's a lot you can do with even limited computational power. And that's why, in my mind, games have been great for a long time, not just recently. I think mobile and console drags for a different reason, which is I think it causes distraction in how the games themselves are developed, not because of the hardware limitations, but because now, rather than as a business being focused on making a title that is the best game possible, you're focused on making a game that is the best game possible that can be controlled by mouse, keyboard, and controller. Yeah. You're focused on making the best game possible that maybe has a snackable version that's accessible for mobile. It brooks your forces. It brooks the corporate focus. And, a great example of that is, this announcement from Activision Blizzard of the mobile Diablo, which I don't think there's anything wrong with at all. I think it's a really smart move. But because the fans want Diablo 4, it looks like, the impression in the community is it looks like Activision Blizzard is not focused on the thing that the fans want. And so that's why I think it's the reality is it is getting increasingly harder to make top tier games today because it's not just games development anymore. It's all the marketing and media and celebrities and esports events and all that stuff that have to go around a game. Right. And so the more things you have on the edges nipping at your corporate focus, the harder it is to achieve. And that's why I think the console and the mobile are challenges.
Final point to Paul.
The one I worry about more is Netflix. It's all these streaming platforms. And we saw Disney announced that they took like a $600 million hit on Hulu. All these streaming services creating content, I really worry about. They're the ones I'm really scared for because they have no way to compete with Fortnite. Zero. They have literally no way to compete. And as attention turns to more interactive experiences and more immersive experiences and gaming in general, these guys, today they're not even profitable, right? Like Netflix is spending billions of dollars buying content, has no way to monetize video in a really good way other than subscriptions. That's the failure of the video and streaming industry, their complete inability to monetize content. And if they're already arguably failing today, not from an audience perspective, from a profitability perspective, this pain is only going to get worse. The Fortnite effect is only going to get more pronounced. And they are only going to they're going to suffer. These guys are going to suffer, and there will be very big failures. Their only saving grace, the literally only saving grace of the Netflix and the other streaming platforms is the hope that they own enough interesting IP that in the future they can use to develop games or sell it to game publishers, really.
Last point on this, I really just think that with that IP, Netflix should just start selling skins.
I agree totally, but that's my point.
Can they monetize different shirts? You can watch scenes in different shirts. I'm just kidding.
No, like a Punisher skin or something like that. You know what I mean?
Let's go on to our last topic. William, we'll start with you on this one. Optic Gaming's main investor is trying to sell the esports arm for $150 million. This was first reported by Jacob Wolf of ESPN, who I was sitting on the ESPN esports desk with Jacob at the Overwatch World Cup at BlizzCon, and Nate Nanzer came by and literally called him the Adam Schefter of esports, which I thought was hilarious. But he's basically breaking down. Yeah, I know. He's basically breaking down this Texas Esports LLC, which is the majority owner of Infinite Esports and Entertainment. They're looking to sell the multi-team esports organization for about a price tag of $100 million. That includes the Optic Gaming brand and Overwatch League's Houston Outlaws. So that's interesting in a sense because even in an adjacent sort of roundabout way, an Overwatch League team in year 2 is already for sale. It doesn't seem like it should be a huge cause for concern, William, but still, this is happening.
See, this is where I really want Paul's thoughts because I can't work out if this is amazing news or terrible news. I can't work out if it's amazing news because of exactly what you said, Arda. This is something that was worth roughly $20 million 2 years ago, and now supposedly is worth $150 million. That should be a huge proof point of success. So that's the amazing news. The bad news is anytime, like if you have something that you think is worth $1, but you think it's going to be worth $10 next year, you don't sell it for $1 this year. You know what I mean? If you think that an asset has significant room to appreciate, you don't let it go cheaply. $150 million is still a long way away from the value of the Dallas Cowboys, which is a $5 billion team. So is this a bad thing? Because it indicates an investor, while they've seen an appreciation in their capital, they also see a ceiling on a valuation in which to exit. And is that a bigger cloud over the Overwatch League and esports in general? So I honestly, I'm divided. I don't know if this is amazing or terrible. And I really want to know Paul's thoughts here.
The reality is we don't have enough information to really, between the three of us, come to an informed conclusion, right? First of all, they say they own a majority stake. They're selling a majority stake. That could mean 51% or it could mean 99%, right? And so we don't have a clear valuation on the business. So they're selling some majority stake for $150 million. What does that mean the entire business is worth? I think is important to understand, because that business could be worth anywhere between 150 and 300 million now, just based on the information we have. And that is still a significant difference. So there's that. Second point is, I think what this says to the world is people still don't understand how to make money owning and buying esports teams today. They still don't. There's still no clear understanding of how to make money doing that. And what I see here, I think what's happening here, and again, we don't have all the information, right? Who knows if the owners just need the cash, they need for some other reason, and so they need to get out, and this is a sale that is essentially being forced. Who knows? But the reality is the fact that they're selling at a relatively high premium tells me that they don't fully understand how they're going to realize the value of this franchise over the next 5 years or 10 years, or however long the Overwatch League says they're going to be around when they sold these franchises. And so what they're relying on today, instead of creating value by building these businesses, is what's known in the investment world as the greater fool theory, which says it doesn't matter what I pay for something as long as I know someone somewhere down the line is going to pay me more for it. And to me, this is an opportunity for them to say, okay, we don't really know how to make this thing worth $1 billion. It's not clear to us. So if we can get $150 million for it, that's a pretty nice return on our investment. We're happy to get out. Thank you very much. That's what it smells like to me from the outside, without really having any of the data to make that conclusion. But I worry for Overwatch League if we start seeing more of this. And I worry for esports team ownership in general if we start seeing more of this. Because at some point, that greater fool theory, you run out of fools. And so at some point, someone's left holding the bag, figuring out how to grow something organically.
That's true. And this is not the first time. I mean, I think it was TD Bank North exited their stake in Splice, right? Just over the December holidays. So this is not, by the way, the first sale of an organization with a slot in it, or a sale by a principal investor of an organization with a significant play in a league in esports. So yeah, this is like it. I'm cautiously, I guess, hearing your explanation, Paul, and the greater fool theory. I'm a little more nervous than I was before. I'm a little more nervous.
Well, we'll continue to talk about this story as we go along as well. Our time is up here on the Business of Esports podcast. However, please follow us on Twitter at BizEsports. Please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. It helps other people find the podcast. And check the website daily, thebusinessofelsports.com. You will get all the news you need from the business of esports right there. For Paul Dalwalibi and William Collis, I'm Ardo Cal. Thank you very much for listening, and we will catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Business of Esports podcast. Check us out at thebusinessofesports.com and on Twitter at BizEsports.